Hello, it's me, Alan. Welcome to the Ubuntu podcast, Season 12, Episode 29. That number just keeps getting bigger. It's Tuesday the 21st of October, and in this episode we're going to have our usual community news, events, and lots more news headlines and a bit of discussion. And with me this week is the usual lovelies, Martin, hello.
Hello.
And Mark.
Hello.
How are you both doing?
I'm fine, but I've just noticed it's Tuesday the 22nd of October.
Never mind.
No one will know unless you mention it.
Whoops.
Martin, what have you been up to?
Well, I have recently been to UbuCon and I got myself a new job.
Oh.
Did you get your new job at UbuCon, or is that a coincidence?
That's purely coincidence.
Okay. What's your new job then?
Well, my new job is that friend of the show, Will Cook, is going to be leaving Canonical, and up till now he's been leading the desktop team.
And he needs a manservant, so...
Yeah, there was an application for a butler. Yeah, that's what I'm going to be, Will's butler.
Seriously, though.
So I'm going back to my roots, going back to the desktop team, and I'm gonna work on the desktop team again, and hopefully make the Ubuntu desktop more great.
Well, if you need any ideas,
yeah, you should listen to last week's episode because there were some guys on there. They were full of ideas.
I hear they knocked it out of the park. It's essential listening for any new manager of the Ubuntu desktop team, I hear.
Brilliant. And you went to UbuCon. Where was that? It was in Portugal, wasn't it?
It was in Sintra, Portugal. So Sintra's it's west of Lisbon, and it's a beautiful town stroke. It's not quite a village. It's a small town, but it's very beautiful. Got lots of castles and palaces. And UbuCon was a great success. The Portugal Loco have outdone themselves. It was a splendid event, extremely well organised. They had the foresight to have late starts, early finishes, lots of gaps between the talks, and a long lunch. So there was lots of time for the hallway track and socialising. It was splendid.
Perfect.
What about you, Mark? What have you been up to?
I really can't remember, so I assume I've been doing baby-related things.
But what are baby-related things?
Sorry?
I mean, it's 16 years ago that I had kids, 13 technically. So, what are these baby-related things?
Oh, clearing out cupboards, buying clothes in the right sizes and combinations, generally getting things ready, going to all sorts of appointments and poking and prodding and... Yeah, the time is going very quickly at the moment.
On the right sizes and combinations, that's very quickly going to go out the window, just so you know, that whole thing. And also, whatever you think are adequate quantities of cotton wool are always inadequate quantities of cotton wool.
Right. Send your cotton wool donations too.
Yes, send your advice for new parents to Mark.
Please don't.
There's one piece of advice. I tell everyone this, and I know all advice from other parents is unsolicited, and nobody likes to hear it because it's like, no, you're all right. I'll do it. I'm fine. I'll do it on my own. But the one piece of advice which is true, and that is that there is only one thing worse than a tired parent, and that is two tired parents. So you have to work as a team and have at least one of you sleeping sometimes.
It's funny, I've noticed that mothers have all sorts of things they want to tell you, but each dad has one piece of sage wisdom that he stores up and tells to all other dads.
I'm telling you, there's never enough cotton wool.
And on that bombshell, let's get on with it. So first up this week in the community news, we have an article from OMG about Regolith adding support for Ubuntu 19.10.
This is a name I keep hearing.
Yes, it's a kind of remix or an overlay you put on top of Ubuntu that gives you an i3-based desktop. So rather than, GNOME or KDE or XFCE, you can use the very popular niche and a bit hipstery at the moment. i3, a lot of people seem to like the i3 tiling window manager. And Regolith is delivered as a bunch of packages in a PPA with some sane defaults. And because it's a PPA, they need to rev it for each release of Ubuntu. And so they've just recently revved for 19.10, the release that came out last week as we record this. There's also a live image you could boot from to install. But the nice thing is you could do a minimum install and then install, add the PPA and then install the packages, and then you've got an i3 based desktop. It's very nice. The settings are super sane, and everyone's opinionated about how you should have i3 set up. But as a good starting point, Regolith is a good way to go.
Yeah, I hear good things about this, and it keeps cropping up. I wonder if they'd be interested in bringing Regolith into the family of flavors, because we don't have a tiling flavor in the official lineup.
Right, and I've heard people ask that. Is there a flavor for i3? Which ISO should I download? Because one of the pitfalls is if you download the default Ubuntu, you're going to get all the GNOME apps and the GNOME desktop and all the other services, and then you'll put in i3 on top of that. And really, a lot of people who want i3 want it for the minimalism. They don't necessarily want to stack it on top of an ISO that's already got a whole load of stuff on it. And so I think it would be great. I mean, they do provide a live ISO image, but I think it would be great if it was a well-supported flavor. That would be awesome, yeah. If only we knew someone who had a role at Canonical that could talk to the people behind Regolith.
We'll have to go through the company directory later and see if we can find anyone.
Yeah. What's up next, Martin?
Well, I saw that Sean from Xubuntu has written a blog post about how to install Xubuntu 19.10 on the Raspberry Pi 4.
Ooh.
So, yes, I think everyone with a Raspberry Pi 4 is now ripping open their boxes in the wrong way, by the way. If you've got a Raspberry Pi 4, look at the box very carefully as to where the open here instructions are. So far, I've only seen people open those the wrong way. Pay close attention to the nice design of the boxes.
I never knew there was a wrong way to open a cardboard box, but there you go.
Well, there is, because they've completely redesigned the way this cardboard box is opened. So if you've got a Pi 4, you probably know what I'm talking about, because you've probably ripped it open the wrong way and it's in tatters.
Meanwhile, back at the point.
So what Sean has documented is how to download the pre-installed server image for the Raspberry Pi 4 of Ubuntu 19.10. So in other news, Ubuntu Server 19.10 is available for the Raspberry Pi 4. Yeah. And what Sean has documented is how to take that image and, in very simple terms, oversimplification warning, then install the Xubuntu meta package on top, so that you then have a desktop environment. So we'll have a link in the show notes to all the steps required. But I think you could probably do this for any of the flavors.
Yeah, one thing I did notice in these instructions is that he mentions that SSH is enabled by default, and in fact you have to log in via SSH first, which is one of the things I said was on my wish list.
Right, and this is because it's the pre-installed server image rather than, an image bespokely developed for, the desktop.
It's a device as well, which you're going to likely want to remote manage. So it makes sense to kind of have an open SSH port, which is contrary to what we normally do on all the other images.
Yeah.
Cool. What's next?
There's been a detailed look at Ubuntu's new experimental ZFS installer published on Ars Technica.
Ah, yes. This is quite detailed as well, isn't it? It's quite lengthy. It was written by Jim Salter, who I think, Martin, you and I met in Linux Fest Northwest.
We did. Yeah, he came into our Snackcraft workshop, in fact.
Yeah, he's quite a ZFS aficionado, shall we say.
I think that's the right word.
And so he was very keen on getting his hands on this as soon as it was available in the ISO, because it landed quite late in the cycle, really, ZFS support.
It landed publicly late, yeah.
Right, that's what I meant. And he wanted to jump on it and start playing with it and poke around at it and see how, because ZFS is one of those things you can configure in a number of different ways. He wanted to see what the default out-of-the-box experience was like. And even though it's experimental and, don't put it on a production system and it will kill your cat, or may kill your cat. So, it's just quite interesting because it's nice to see an external person who's an enthusiast about a technology that we've implemented, like talking about it from a position of some authority on the matter.
Yeah.
He was really taken with, explaining what the potential was with ZFS snapshots. So the implementation in 1910 is experimental and it's experimental because the way the disk is laid out may change in 2004. And we're not making any guarantees that you'll actually be able to upgrade from a 1910 to a 2004 with ZFS en route because of the changes we may or may not make. But Jim really wanted to try and see, well, what can we do with snapshots on ZFS if it's installed in this way? And can you recover from, catastrophic failures? And yes, those mechanisms are there if you're prepared to manually wrangle ZFS snapshots and what have you. But Didier and Jean-Baptiste from the desktop team have also been working on a tool called ZSys. And I've said it that way because it's the only way I've heard it being pronounced so far. And that should materialize for reals in 2004. And that will hook into apt and the grub bootloader so that as you do updates and upgrades, snapshots will automatically be taken so that you can boot back into an earlier snapshot if disaster strikes.
Nice.
But if you want to experiment with ZSys, it is in the archive and you can apt install ZSys.
Covering all the bases there.
I'm doing it both ways just to satisfy everybody.
Don't fall for it, Martin. You be your own man. You be you.
It's worth listening. It's worth reading that article if you're new to ZFS.
Yeah, he covers some of the more interesting features in a very understandable way to someone who's not a file system geek.
And if you don't like reading and you prefer listening, he also goes into similar detail in episode 414 of the TechSnap podcast.
Next up, Colin Stato King from the Ubuntu kernel team is back with some interesting data in a blog post. And he's used a piece of software called StressNG, which he maintains. And he's run it against a bunch of different types of processors to stress test the CPUs, but also to determine what temperature they go up to when running different types of tests. I won't give you the conclusion. I'm not going to spoil it, but it makes for a pretty graph, that's for sure. I always find his stuff interesting because it's like low-level stuff that's kind of beyond my understanding in some ways, but he presents it in quite a fascinating way, where he's trying to figure out what the best way is to stress test a CPU, and there seems to be different ways that CPUs get stressed. There isn't just there's a test we used to do in the Hampshire lug, which was count to 1 billion in Perl, and you would think that that's going to just stress one core of a CPU, and it would stress it in exactly the same way, whatever the CPU. But it really doesn't, and it's quite fascinating how CPUs are optimized for different algorithms and different, and the compiler turns an algorithm into a different code path depending upon the type of CPU and architecture and generation and all that kind of stuff. I find it pretty fascinating. It's quite a short article, but it's very pretty.
So the code name for Ubuntu 2004 LTS has been revealed.
Is it pronounceable?
Thankfully, very pronounceable, yes. The new code name is Focal Fossa. Aha!
Fans of the movie Madagascar will be familiar with this animal then.
Oh, really? Is that a thing?
Yes. Well, as this is an animal from Madagascar, it kind of gives it away. But yeah, they're the bad guys that all of the I was going to say emus. They're not emus. They are lemurs. Are scared of
lemurs. Okay, so yes, a fossa is a cat-like carnivorous mammal that lives in Madagascar.
Mm. And I've seen people, as soon as this news broke, as if news of an Ubuntu code name breaks, a lot of people pointed out that the word focal sounds very similar to fecal, and fossa sounds or is the same word used in other languages for a ditch or a drain or a sewer. So I found that interesting that that's the immediate reaction that people have when they see. And I don't know if, we knew this before that name was chosen, because the method by which the name is chosen is shrouded in mystery and kind of. It's a word that we're going to be using quite a lot. But thankfully, the word that we're going to be using is focal most of the time.
I really wanted like a funky flamingo myself.
Yeah, it seems quite a lot of people would have preferred that. Yes,
but the LTS names do tend to be quite calm and measured, don't they?
Yes, they tend to be precise.
Oh dear me! What's next, Mark?
GNOME has filed a defence against the patent troll. So we discussed this in episode 21 that GNOME had been served with a claim against Shotwell that it had infringed the patent of Rothschild Patent Imaging LLC, and they've gone into some detail that they were offered a 5-figure amount to settle out of court, which they declined to do, and are now going to. Well, they've filed 3 papers with the court, one to dismiss the case, one to answer the claim and say that Shotwell doesn't actually infringe the patent, and third to counterclaim against the patent troll. And they have launched a crowdfunding campaign for the Patent Troll Defence Fund. So if you want to chip in and help with the not inconsiderable costs involved, then please do. We'll have a link in the show notes.
Yes, indeed. The money does seem to be flowing in, but they have quite a significant target to hit, so it'll be good.
It will be considerable.
They pointed out it would have been a lot cheaper for them to settle, but they don't think it would have been right to do so. They want to make sure that this kind of thing doesn't happen to other people, so it's important.
I think I said in episode 21 I worked for a company that was pursued by a patent troll some years ago, and we did try and defend ourselves for I think nearly a year, and basically continuing to do so would have broken the company. So we actually elected to settle just to make sure the company survived. I can understand why the GNOME Foundation feel on moral grounds they can't do that or shouldn't do that. So yes.
I don't know. Is it they must have taken legal advice from someone who's said, financially this, I don't know, is it going to cripple you? What funds do the GNOME Foundation have that, this can take? And if they won, or if they settled, like, would it cripple the foundation, or will they just do another drive to say we need to replace the funds?
I don't know. I mean, well, I know how much it cost the company I was working for at the time, and I've seen reports of significant donations that the GNOME Foundation have received recently, and just defending themselves against this lawsuit, if it was similar costs to those that we were incurring at the time, that would pretty much absorb most of, what's been reported as donations recently.
So yes, if you've got some funds spare, or the odd Bitcoin you can cash in, then maybe throw some of it towards the GNOME Foundation so they can defend against this nonsense. Finally, Ubuntu is 15 years old.
Cool.
Yeah. 15 years ago on the 21st of October, was it the 21st? I think. 20th. The 20th of October, the announcement was made to the mailing list that Ubuntu 4.10, the Warty Warthog, was released, and it featured GNOME 2.8, Firefox 0.9, and Evolution 2.0 with OpenOffice 1.1.2. Sounds very much like an Ubuntu Mate release.
It really does, doesn't it? It really does, you cheeky git.
I like the fact that it shipped with X386 4.3 with improved hardware support, which, I think, obviously every release has improved hardware support, but I like the fact that it was X386 because now it's Xorg, and And OpenOffice is replaced by LibreOffice. And it's kind of funny how these things have moved on, but not really moved on tremendously either.
Yeah, I was surprised to see X386 written there because I'd forgotten that transition had happened.
Yeah. And numerous other transitions. I mean, over the years, there's been the default application set has changed quite a bit. You know, for a while we shipped GIMP and then we stopped, and we shipped Pitivi for a while and then we stopped, and
music players have gone around and around.
Yeah, come and gone. Yeah, we had Rhythmbox, then Banshee, I think, and F-Spot was a photo manager, I think.
I think that sort of churn of default applications was part of the allure of those, interim releases back then, though, because there was some difference between them, and it was an opportunity to try out, a different application and see what you've thought about it. The default applications have been pretty static for some time now.
Right. Well, 15 years, yeah. They chose the name Warty because the team thought the first release would have a few warts, and the development team had a mailing list called Warthogs, which survived for a very long time. The Warthogs list survived long after the first few releases and was the internal mailing list at Canonical, and has been for a very long time. So yeah, in fact, it still is, isn't it?
It still is. Yeah, we still have an internal list called Warthogs, and it's also the affectionate term known for people that do or have worked at Canonical.
If you have any memories of Ubuntu over the last 15 years, of what release you started on, or any high points over the last 15 years, then do send them to us via all the usual means. I'm sure Laura will tell you about later. And now it's time for the news. What's first up, Martin?
Dex is dead, says Samsung.
Good Lord.
What's Dex?
This is Samsung's sort of convergence play, I suppose, on their line. Was it a Note 10 and a Galaxy Note tablet that they had this on?
Yeah, there was a bunch of devices that could do it, yeah.
Yeah. So the idea is that there were some of their devices that had this DeX system. So you would buy a DeX dock, and then you would be able to connect said phone or tablet to an external display, mouse and keyboard, and then you'd be able to use that device like a sort of a desktop PC. So, but that was with, Android would augment in some fashion so that you could use it as a desktop machine. But it also had a feature where you could run a version of Ubuntu 16.04 desktop as an app.
So is this similar to what Canonical were demoing a few years ago, where you could...
The Ubuntu on Android, Ubuntu for Android.
That's the one, Ubuntu, yes.
Yeah, it's very similar, almost identical, but I'm not sure they had the same kind of level of integration at Samsung that we did on... or they may have had, but just done differently, because the Ubuntu for Android, you could, like, your contacts that were inside Android would show up in Thunderbird when you type in mails and stuff like that. But the thing about, Ubuntu for Android is that never got released. It was only ever demonstrated and shown around phone handset manufacturers, including Samsung. And then Samsung come along with DeX, which is interesting. And this thing never left beta, really, did it? I don't know if... I personally have speculated the reason why this is killed. Well, it's not DeX that's dead, it's Linux on DeX. So it's the Ubuntu on DeX that's dead. I have been speculating the reason why is that they've said it will not work when you update your device to Android 10. And I wonder if Google have changed the terms for the Android, license agreement that for all the Play services, that when you go to Android 10, you're now not allowed to ship something that directly competes with Android.
That's an interesting idea, but kind of contradicts what they're doing with Chromebooks, where they're actively promoting the ability to run Linux distributions and apps on Chrome OS.
But the difference here is Google are doing that themselves, whereas DeX is a third party competing with Google's OS. So I don't know. This is just wild speculation, but having spoken to people in the industry, this is the kind of thing Google do. So
okay.
Yes.
So just to reiterate as a PSA, if you have one of the DeX compatible devices and you value being able to run Ubuntu on your DeX dock, if you upgrade from Android 9 to 10, you will lose the ability to do that.
And you can't even downgrade either.
Right. It's a one-way upgrade.
Next up, Phoronix have published an interview with the ex-CTO from Purism, and you may remember the name Purism from the company that make Pure OS, the operating system, and laptops, which have hardware kill switches and a fully free operating system, modulo some blobs. And the interview was interesting in that Zlatan Todoric, I think, was the CTO at Purism, but left Purism about a year ago. And he's now been interviewed by Michael Larabelle at Phoronix after his NDA has expired, after his non-disclosure agreement. So it was a little bit uncomfortable airing the dirty laundry in public. And I think some people have commented that this was a bad move on his part. But it was certainly very interesting for those of us who've been very skeptical about claims that Purism have been making over the last 2 years since their crowdfunder.
I think it's okay to be skeptical. Being skeptical is a facet of being a critical thinker, and critical thinking should be encouraged. And I think Zlatan has done the right thing, because he was being sort of cited and referenced by other people in commentary about what may or may not have been going on at Purism, and he felt he needed to set the record straight by telling it how it was from his point of view, so that he wasn't being misrepresented, and he just chose to be as open and frank as he could.
I mean, it's quite an interesting exclusive for Michael at Phoronix. It's not the site I would have expected to have this kind of article at. And he does call out some of the missteps Purism have made over the years, and, some under his leadership and some, that he's seen from the outside as well.
Yeah, it is a shame because, when we've discussed Purism in the past, particularly around the Librem 1 crowdfunder, I've aired some concerns, and what was, the kind of stories that were told in this interview only served to kind of back up the feeling I had, and nothing else that Librem have done or, their spokespeople have said have really done anything to allay those fears.
I think the problem is, for those of us who've been around a while and seen some of these technologies develop over the years, and seen people try and develop things like, Linux mobile phones. Some of us have been there and know how hard this is. The claims that get made just don't pass the sniff test, and having that confirmed by someone who was the CTO of the company kind of cements that. It's a very sad situation, because we all want them to succeed. That's, it's part of the FOSS community is we generally support each other. But if you don't pass the sniff test and you look like a con man and a liar, then people are going to be exceptionally skeptical. And the problem is that Purism looks like they're conning people and lying. And that doesn't help the FOSS community, because it rubs off on everyone else.
It taints the whole community and everything else future organisations might seek to achieve.
What's up next, Mark?
Well, in better news, the UK government has dropped its plans for blocking of adult content.
Is this the Great Wall of Brexit being tumbled?
So this is some plans which have been ongoing for a few years, whereby websites hosting certain niche audiovisual materials were going to have to implement age verification systems. Essentially, you would have to prove who you were and that you were an adult in order to access the website. And there were various concerns aired about this. It's been delayed a few times, partly for technical reasons, because, the people who would have had to have implemented this were saying you can't really do this. And then also for legal reasons, because other people from the sort of human rights side were saying you can't really do this. and they found out that, they can't really do it. So they've said that they're not going to be continuing.
I can see why some people want them to do this, and I can see why they thought that magically the computers must be able to do this kind of thing, because everyone's been to, probably a hotel or a rubbish network somewhere where it blocks content, and they probably think, oh, well, that would work. Just do that. Do what they do in the school where it blocks my son being able to access some dodgy website. Just do that. I feel that they maybe had a simplistic view of it before they looked deeply into what the technical requirements are.
The obvious criticisms were, well, if someone wants to access something which is blocked in the United Kingdom, they can just use a VPN so they don't look like they're in the United Kingdom anymore. Not every site was covered by the law, so it was only sites that had more than 1/3 of this kind of content, which is an interesting thing to try and prove.
Is that by minutes or by resolution or?
Yeah, good question.
Skin tone?
Data?
Yeah, that's a heuristic that I used to work with a guy who actually did his thesis on image analysis to determine what the nature of the images were by percentage of human skin tone in the images.
Interestingly, it seems that the filters in the Houses of Parliament work quite well. There was a Freedom of Information request recently which said that they block about 160 requests per day.
Gosh, that's an unfortunate number of misclicks in their browser.
All by accident, I'm sure.
Right. Let's leave that there.
We love getting your feedback. If you've got a comment about something you hear on the show, why don't you drop us an email on show@ubuntupodcast.org.
And that's all for episode 29. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We will be back next week with a discussion of what happened in Manchester at OggCamp.
Ooh-ah.
Yes. If you want to get in touch, as Laura says, show@ubuntupodcast.org. You can also drop by our Telegram group, which is ubuntupodcast.org/Telegram. And we've got a Twitter account. You may have seen it. It's @UbuntuPodcast. Say hello to us there. Bye-bye.